Welcome back to the Daily Edge here with TJ and Todd, my brothers. And this morning we are going to talk about masculinity. I think that can mean a lot of different things, but I feel like we're in a society where some of the God-given primal path instincts that we are born with are not being exercised as much as they probably were back in the day. I think there's a lot of things at play in our current culture. There's a lot of things we're doing, and I'll kind of just jump in with an example. I believe that men like to pursue. They like to pursue progress. They like to. They want to feel needed. They want to feel useful, and these are things that prior to screens, technology, video games, that testosterone you have when you're and you're probably teens, your early teens, mid-teens, late teens, is pushing you. It's pushing you to do things, to put yourself out there, to take risks, which eventually would probably find you a mate, which would then, start to calm you back down and balance you out a little bit. It feels like some of the things that we have created is creating an easy button for that. For example, video games being one that you can sit down and I can feel progress. I can join a community online. I can do these different things, which in some sense is curbing that, which you could argue is a good thing for society as a whole, because it's probably not as violent because men are kind of being tamed a little bit. But what are your guys' thoughts on this?
I've got quite a few thoughts. I've had a lot of time to think about this over the last couple of years, just digesting a bunch of different content around it. And I think that, what we're doing is, we look at, there's a couple of different approaches. Let me put it this way. There's a couple of different approaches when it comes to increasing your capabilities within a certain discipline. And by that, I mean, when you're pursuing excellence in something, the two paths are typically focus on what you're good at and optimize that and continue to get better at the thing you're already good at, and or work on your weaknesses. And I think as it relates to masculinity, that's kind of fallen out of balance. We've obviously evolved in a particular manner. And I think from even pre-testosterone, even pre-puberty, you're seeing things change a little bit. If you rewind a couple of different generations, kids were in the fields at 5 or 6 years old, right? And they were, you see kids nowadays, our kids, everybody lives in, not everybody, right? But society as a whole spends a lot of time indoors, lives inside a lot, and boys, and I think we're going back in the right direction, but for a period of time, there was a massive effort to kind of quell that boy energy. And if you have had boys and girls, you can see the decided difference. By the time they're probably 8 to 10 months old, you can see the difference in, for the most part, right, the difference in the way that they interact with the world. And so I think that's what's happened over time is, instead of being able to be outside, and this kind of speaks to what you're talking about with video games, be outside and be getting that energy out and doing those different things, whether it's working when you're really young or playing. I think that definitely pushes down those natural instincts, natural feelings, and it can create a unique dichotomy, meaning that at some point you have to deal with that. How you deal with that, meaning that kind of sowing your royal oats, if you will, like kind of getting out there and figuring out how to manage masculinity. I think that at some point you have to do that. So, again, I think, from a societal perspective, we've definitely pushed down those natural tendencies from a male perspective. That's too wild, that's too aggressive, that's too much. And I think it does leave the man, as they get older, kind of confused and wondering, okay, where do I go with this? What do I do? These things are bad. These things that I feel naturally are bad. I need to take another path. And I think that puts, that's why we potentially have the situation with kind of struggle with mental illness right now.
Yeah, I think when you start to mess with something that's been deeply instilled over the course of evolution of tens of thousands of years, I think you do start to, it becomes treacherous, dangerous territory. I would touch on this a little bit differently. I feel like society doesn't value masculinity like it once did, just in general. And I think some of that has come in the form of gender equality. I think has numbed the value of masculinity. And my point to share that is not to say that gender equality has been a bad thing, but I think in certain areas, maybe that pendulum has swung too far. What I mean by that is there's been a point, and I'll speak to this as someone who has a spouse who's incredibly successful professionally. That's where I met her, was at Liberty Mutual Insurance, where we both started out of college. She was a Lilly Scholar from Notre Dame, a Lilly Scholar that went to Notre Dame, very, very smart and very bright professionally. And candidly, that is what, that was a lot of why I was attracted to her. I really enjoyed that about her and cognitively challenged me. So I say all of this in the context that I believe society has diminished the role of the mom in the home. And I think that is such an important role. And I'm not sure where or why that happened, but at some point there started to get traction that women are better than being, stuck in the home raising the kids. And I think for certain people, what I think was great about that movement, so to speak, is I think there are some people who may not be cut out for that. And my wife in particular, I think, thrives more in the workplace setting. She's got a very logical mind, and I think kind of thrives more in that setting than at home. And so I think in certain situations, I think it's great that women have the flexibility to pursue what makes sense for them. I think, however, the way that pendulum has swung, I think you have a lot of moms doing some incredible things at home that aren't feeling valued and supported. Just from a societal perspective, I think they're feeling like they're not enough. And I think that's been an issue with that movement. And so I see that push for equality as having really challenged. You talked about the roles of the male and the female, and the whole idea of masculinity. It's like, well, no, we're gonna kind of pull roles out of this. The woman or the man can do anything in the household, and I think it's just gotten a little toxic.
What's interesting, I think there are observable metrics for success, and then there's internal metrics for success. What I hear you saying is we look at those observable, the things you can flex on Instagram. It's the cars, it's the money, it's the job, it's the house. And those are the things that I think society says success, how you determine success. And so then you have your internal metrics, like I'm sleeping well at night, I have a great relationship with my spouse and my kids. You have this internal piece, and those are things that aren't really measured. And what I hear you saying is like those internal metrics, which are very, very important, they don't feel as important. So like for a woman who's like, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. Like, I mean, I think you hear that all the time. So I have a wife that stays at home, and I think there's a constant challenge with like, well, what am I doing with my life? Like, what's my purpose? And like, your job is way more important than mine. You're like raising these kids and the family, but because society doesn't value that as much, and because those aren't observable, and those are the things that, and I think my guess is from woman to woman, that is even harder when a woman is like, maybe she's in a profession, is like, so what do you do now? And then you're like, oh, well, I just stay home.
Correct.
And there's this, I don't want to say lack of appreciation, because I think everyone knows how important that role is, but as a society, it doesn't seem to be valued as equally, or in a lot of cases, more important.
What?
I was just going to say, there's even sensitive around that terminology. Like, there's the sensitivity. You have to be very careful how you ask that. And so, like, some of the questions, like, does your wife work outside the home, is like a better way to ask versus does your wife work? It's become such a thing that there's a ton of sensitivity even around asking the question, because if you ask the question, does your wife work professionally? It's like, again, it's got this like demeaning, I think unnecessarily demeaning interpretation.
How do we feel about this? So we know that we've talked about a lot, the main driver with life itself is purpose. Right, and that's what keeps you alive, keeps you going, keeps you waking up every day. And we've all seen the studies around what happens when purpose subsides. So, the feminist movement is what we're talking about when women started to seek jobs outside of the home. And I often wonder, there's two sides to that coin as well. Side one is we are all wired to want more, something different, something new, again, something that's validating.
Men.
Anybody. I think anybody. I mean, like, once you get X, you think that Y, because it's more is better, or this different route. So that could have been the initial reason for this. The other piece of the puzzle, and I don't know if this is going to sound misogynistic or whatever, but if you again rewind a couple generations, it wasn't possible for the household to stay afloat if the woman worked. It just wasn't, because everything was manually done, right? And we're talking generations back where you're making the clothes, where you're hand washing everything, and of course your kids are helping you and chores are more prevalent and things of that nature. But there's a lot of purpose in that because it's tactical execution on a daily basis. You're seeing day to day to day, hour to hour to hour, all of these things that you're doing to keep the homestead functioning. You're engaged, I'm sure, with the farming and different aspects of that. And then as we become a more technologically advanced society, I can see you get to the point where we're at, and you're a grown woman in 2025, and the laundry takes 3 minutes to put in the laundry, and the dishwasher's there, and a lot of people have help around the house because of the way things have economically shifted up. So, I think there's that element of it too. Now is like, man, it's kind of hard to find. We've talked a lot professionally about how hard it is to find self-worth when you stop doing tactical things, when you become an idea person. And so I'm wondering if that's a contributing factor to where we're at today, and is why we're seeing this kind of continued push.
I think that's 100% spot on. I was listening to a webinar on AI yesterday, which was talking about just this, because it's about to get a lot worse. That if you let go of your purpose and your mission and your values in this AI world over the next few decades, you're going to be in a really bad spot, because there's going to be very little that you actually need to do to survive. Because I agree with you. I think I even find this, like, even after doing dishes, if I'm like standing at the sink and pots and pans and that sort of thing, like mentally there's a calmness to that, at least for me, because there's an accomplishment, there's an achievement, and we're not only losing that, but I think we're just losing a general purpose more broadly, because there's very little or much less and increasingly less that needs to be done every single day to survive. And so I think that is a huge part of this, and it's going to get a lot worse.
2 stats. Male suicide, all-time high. Heard a podcast where I think they said it's just as high as like people that die from breast cancer. Like, male suicide is a real thing. It doesn't get talked about a ton, but it's, what are you guys' thoughts around that, and just purpose, and what do you think is causing that versus women versus anyone else? Like, what do you guys believe is the main contributor? I have to think that there's something tied to purpose and usefulness, and I'm just wondering, with this shift that we've seen with men, I think innately desire to be useful, to be a contributor, to add value, and it appears to be harder and harder for that to happen, because similar to the things changing within the household have changed in the workplace, right? Like there's a lot of different work isn't maybe as manual as it used to be in a lot of areas, and men trying to get ahead to be able to provide that value for their family is harder and harder to be in a tier where they can maybe outperform or outwork in the professional world the women. And so you've got, I think when a man hits a point where he's like, I don't feel like I'm contributing or I'm doing enough or I'm letting my family down or my spouse down and I'm not, like, that's got to be very depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's everything we've just been talking about. I think, yeah, I don't know that there's a whole lot more to add there. I think, the other thing I would add, just in terms of kind of feeling like you have a purpose, I don't even think it's so much that, I mentioned earlier, I think society is starting to say, whether male, female, you could and should do the same things to contribute to the household, whether it's working or chores or thing with the kids. And I think that is eroding value on both sides of the relationship. I would say even a better spot would be switched roles. Even you have some stay-at-home dads now, and I think that at least there's some accomplishment, there's a role, there's a value proposition you're bringing to the family that even though it's not the most masculine type of thing, I think there can be some positives come from that because there's some distinct value that you're bringing. In this world where it's everyone should be doing the same things and the husbands should be, there's kind of a criticism of husbands not doing enough of the changing of the diapers and all of those sorts of things, because everybody should be doing everything. And living in a household that is kind of more on that wavelength, I do think there is something that's missed from distinct roles in the household. I think that's something that obviously was in place for many, many, many centuries, and that's the danger. And I'll try not to bring this back to religion, but that's one of the things that I love about the Catholic Church is that they're very, very true to that tradition, and they don't waver with societal perspectives that come in and out. And I think that's the danger of this, something that's been in place and worked extremely well for millennia. And we get this idea over the course of a few decades that we think we're going to do it differently and it's going to be way better, that I think there is a lack of thoughtfulness sometimes that goes into the fact that has worked so well for so long. Why are we trying to force change upon that? And I've already alluded to some of the reasons why I think good things have come of this. I'm not saying this has all been bad, but I think we are in some dangerous territory because people are starting to lose their purpose and they're starting to lose their lives.
I do want to talk about marriage because I obviously marriage today versus 50 years ago is completely different. Roles are different. Expectations are different. Divorce rates different. And maybe there was just as many miserable people and that just didn't divorce back then because it just wasn't as accepted to your point.
Yeah.
Do you believe the current, I don't know, part of me just thinks the lack of masculinity in men and women looking for that, or women looking for different roles to do different things. I'm just wondering how much of that do you think plays into the way marriage has transpired and where we are today?
Well, I think that women seek out excellence. I think you learn that in dating, right? And I think that's any partner, men tend to, for men, excellence tends to be appearance off the jump and then kind of snowballs from there. But be desireless, be excellent, be gone. The Tao of Steve. But that's the thing, right? Is there's this pursuit of excellence. And I think in today's society, there's less of that. There's a lot of jack of all trades, masters of none. There's a lot of it is fleeting. I think, some of these big changes that we're talking about there wasn't the foundation there to make a shift like that. 50, 60, 70 years ago, it was much more difficult to separate the family, I think, just from a workload perspective. let alone, but today we have the technology where it's painful, but it's doable. It has definitely become more common. I think it's 1 in 2. It might be over 50% now in terms of that particular rate. But I think it also
divorce rate.
Yeah. But I think it also speaks to just this you kind of talked about social media, this idea that the Disney princess life is out there. And I'm not saying that as it relates to women. You could say the Disney prince life as well as it relates to men, but we're completely overrun with the social media flexes. And, we've talked about getting down that hole and getting deep down that hole and thinking that there's more down there. And, the more you have, the better it's going to be, instead of looking how, again, I bring this back to the same thing. Like he brings it back to religion. I bring it back to recognizing that it's really about your contribution to the future of humanity, and recognizing, okay, this is what I can do to best serve that, versus if I don't get more money, I'm not worth anything. If I don't do this, I'm not worth anything. And I think you look potentially at family structures over the last, we'll even say 50 years, where now we are seeing, again, I think we've talked a lot about the divide. We are seeing more, like you've talked ad nauseum about how difficult it is to work with a GC, like to get a general contractor. So we're definitely seeing like this divide where there for a moment in time, the trades were, I wouldn't say they were less valued. From a societal perspective, they were still extremely valuable. You need all of these things to establish a home and can continue to keep it running. But I'm interested kind of your guys' thoughts as it relates to some of those statements.
I would say there's a couple for me that I think, to answer your question, Trent, how has the recent tone on masculinity impacted marriages? 2 things. One, when you don't do something every day, or if you do something very often, it's often a much more intimidating task. So if you don't ever do the laundry, the idea of doing the laundry becomes, especially the more distant you get to it, it becomes very intimidating, very overwhelming, very arduous. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. And if someone's doing that for you, the appreciation goes up substantially. And short term. I think for me, I think it's,
you value someone doing the laundry the same now as you did 6 months ago, 9 months ago.
I think to your point, I guess you can normalize. I mean, there's a natural thing to lose gratitude for that sort of thing. But I think even the thought, I think there are persistent thoughts of having to do your own laundry that creep in there and help that gratitude to persist. My point in that is, as women and men have started to both do very similar things around the household, I think the appreciation for each other has dropped. I think when you have everybody trying to do everything, then you get into counting, well, who's doing more of what, and you have more tension and you have a lack of appreciation for each other. I think it's very, very straightforward what's happening there. And I think that's impacting the joy in a lot of people's lives. I think the other thing that we talked about that is not helping, isn't necessarily directly related to masculinity, is we have the time to wonder. We have there's the free time and the discretionary time, I think, to think about those sorts of things. How happy am I in my marriage? Could I be happier, in another situation? And TJ just kind of talked about it. There was a point in time where there was so much work to be done in the household to keep things moving and going, there wasn't a lot of time to entertain those sorts of things. We didn't live in a society. I mean, certainly, I think some of the things that were also pointed out, yes, I think while there is still a stigma with divorce, I think it was probably, it's gotten better over time. It was worse 50, 60, 100 years ago. That was looked down upon very substantially from both sides. So those are a couple of things that jump out to me that I think are not helping the situation.
I want to jump back on that because I think I kind of lost my train of thought, but back to kind of this happiness thing. And we talked about this months and months and months ago. I think you had made a comment to Trent about pursuit of happiness or whatever. And I think that's a fool's errand, meaning that, like, Tara and I were talking the other night and we were talking about things. She's like, you're never happy. And I'm like, in the traditional sense. I'm like, that's not my purpose. I'm fulfilled. Like, I don't personally, like, I'm not pulled in, and it's taken years, I think, to get there. I would say that when we were out in Seattle, it was completely the opposite. We thought there was a way to buy ourselves into happiness or whatever it was. But, you know, we've gotten to the point, I think most of us are on the same page where none of it really matters, right? I'm here to be fulfilled. And fulfillment comes from providing for my kids and my wife and my friends and family and being there. And that's where it comes from. So, you know, if I were somebody, especially again with social media, that believed that pursuit of happiness was the right vacation at the right time with the right people at the right hotel with the right, you know, sustenance, right? I got all this amazing food and whatever. I could see really quickly how, as a spouse, you would start to, you know, I think from a human perspective, naturally, you start to point fingers and you start to build resentment towards people because you're not achieving what you think this ultimate happiness is. And so I think that, you know, my explanation to her was, I'm just as happy as I've ever been, but it's through this other lens. And that's what, for me, I think keeps our marriage in a good place from my perspective. Obviously, that's not hers. Is that, you know, as long as I'm able to do those things, and that kind of goes back to what you were talking about, Trent, about being needed. But at the same time, you know, I try to focus on seeking out where those gaps are so that I can fill them. But I can imagine, you know, with all the Instagram models out there and everything else that you see, that there is, like you said, time to wonder and think about, well, what could be when you have kind of carnal desires as your perception of what happiness really is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mentioned kind of wondering, and I think social media has also made it much more palatable for you to envision yourself in other situations. That I think has also been very problematic.
And if you don't date a lot, and if you're not exposed socially a lot, you know, I think we were blessed in a sense that, you know, we got to do those types of things because of the culture at the time we grew up, where, you know, by the time I met my wife, I knew exactly what I wanted and what I didn't want. And I'd been, you know, I'd engaged through my employment at the time with hundreds, if not thousands of people, and learned about different types of personalities. So a lot of that time that you would wonder if, and I'm not, again, I shouldn't say this, like, you know, if you married your high school sweetheart in 1965 and you stayed in your hometown, you probably met everybody. And I'm just, this is, you know, but you probably met everybody that could be tempting to you as you grew up. If you were in a smaller farm, you probably knew everybody. And you weren't constantly exposed to, I mean, even if you think about, and this is kind of getting down the path, when you think about when we were kids, access to scantily clad women, porn for a lack of, was not easy. Now it is right there. And so it's this compounding effect that you're able to keep yourself through things like video games, through things like online communities, more insulated against social engagement outside of traditional school. So you have that lack of exposure versus what, and you've heard this about kids today, men, you know, younger men today, their exposure to women is porn. Their exposure to women are these things, and that is what they think it's supposed to be. That's what they think it's like. And that's where a lot of that depression comes in. They have their first experience after watching that, and it's decidedly different. And then all of a sudden you feel like a failure because you didn't perform to the perception that you've had about what this is supposed to be. And you hear all of these stories, and you hear discussions and podcasts, and you watch videos that paint these particular pictures, and you don't know where the person on the podcast is in their life. They could be in their 50s and talking about their relationships. And then all of a sudden, again, your only exposure to what relationships should be like is this 50-year-old talking about a relationship they've been working on for 20 years, and you start to feel insignificant. So I think that's an interesting scenario that we're in.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you guys said. The purpose statement, and when we all realize that I think we all, at some point in time, were trading the present for the future, right? We were, oh, I'm gonna do this now so that in the future that I'm gonna have something better. I'm gonna be on the better vacation. When we start to realize that serving is really more an internal metric that we should be valuing. When we look at husband and wife, why do we think? Because over time, I think with social media, people started to, or I want to say just people, it's easy to start looking at those things on social media. Like, oh, this person did this. This is what success is. And we start to put a focus there versus the appreciation for, I've got a good family. I've got a husband or wife that works hard or takes care of the family. There's this family model. I don't care whether it's the man working or the female working outside. Both are working. Both are contributing to the family. And now all of a sudden we've changed our focus to, it feels like keeping up with the Joneses. It's the house, it's the cars, it's the next thing. I'll be happier if I was in a bigger house. I'll be happier and we go and we pursue these things because we are never satisfied, because we like to progress, but I think a lot of times we miss because we don't progress in the things that matter most.
Yeah.
We progress in the things that the world says is the most important thing, or the things that are in front of us. And there's this, the psychology around marketing and needing more and wanting more and having the next thing is super powerful and then you take that into the kids and you talk about these addictions. I feel like our kids are not getting fully developed, especially our men, because they're not having to take the risks and put themselves out there like maybe we had to back in the day because of some of the things that have been developed. And I'm wondering, as they get older, how this next generation marriage will look. If it's a big thing, or people like, is it still going to be something that, or are we going to see the tide change? And maybe marriage is going to be something that is, people, I don't know. I'm just.
Yeah, a couple things. I wonder if any of the decrease in ability to achieve and be valued around the home is compounding some of the desires to accumulate material things. I wonder if there's, in a sense, a cry for help there of that is what people have to chase because of their inability to get that fulfillment elsewhere. I'm curious if that's at play. I do think things will cycle back. I think people are finding that the promise and allure of, I think, what was probably born in the 70s, this idea of freedom, of kind of doing whatever you want, whenever you want, whoever you want, however you want, I think is continuing to fade. That promise of get out of that marriage or get out of this. Not to say that there aren't marriages that are toxic that people do need to get out of, but I think society as a whole does encourage people to pursue happiness as opposed to fulfillment. And I think that's a huge challenge. And I think people will find that is fleeting. And I think people will come back to my take on this. People come back to the pursuit of fulfillment. And that, I think, is where true joy lies. I think people search for the happiness in the material things as opposed to, and we just had this conversation the other day a little bit professionally, and I was having a very similar conversation to what TJ, you mentioned you having with Tara, that happiness and like fun is not my purpose. My purpose is to leave this world better off than I found it, to the extent that my gifts and talents will allow. And if I have an opportunity to make that progress and have that impact, that's where my true fulfillment's going to come from.
Yeah, in that conversation we're having, one of the things that was clear to me is that for different people, especially at different ages, that's vastly different, right? I think as you get older, the tendency is to become less self-focused and more other-focused as you start to see the end come. I believe we go through different experiences. Like in my life, I was on the pursuit of more, and arguably I still am to some extent, but not like I was, because I found that there's no end to that funnel, and that once you get to a certain spot in that funnel, it doesn't matter. And so as I've experienced that, it's challenged me to look at where I spend my time and the things I'm spending my time on. And I find that I love the work and the purpose I get from work and the problems to solve, and I love to grow, and I get excited in that realm. But I also am in a really fun time with my family, and I find tons of excitement leaning into what they're doing and serving them. And so then there's this balance of like, I like to serve the people at the office or offices, and then I like to serve other community leaders that I'm partners with, and then I like to serve my kids. So I think there's a lot of different areas to do those things, and depending on where you are in your life, I don't think it all has to be professionally.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I wanted to bring this back to masculinity a little bit, and some of the societal impacts. And I know you guys don't have multiple boys in close ages, but society has continued to gotten softer and safer over time, where the risks that people would allow their young boys in particular to make 50, even 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago are much more than what there is an appetite for today.
Irrational fear.
And I think some of that comes from our access to information out there.
100%.
And you get people that say, oh, so-and-so did this, died doing this, and that may be 1 out of a million, but you plant that in someone's head, and then someone starts to control the situation. I know, and this just for me, having boys around the house, they like to wrestle. And I know Jenna in particular gets a lot of anxiety around that because there is so much fear that's been implanted societally, in my perspective. And even naturally, I have some instincts there that have been planted from society. I try to fight those to the best of my ability because I know what's the worst thing that's going to happen with him wrestling, right? But that ability to get that energy out, to lean into that energy, explore that energy. We were just talking with Anthony the other day about him. He was so glad that his parents had the house that they did because he could go out back and shoot BB guns and set things on fire. And now his son's trying to do that in the middle of Denver, Colorado, and it's not quite as acceptable. And so I think that's another thing that kids are kind of told and trained at a young age, that masculine energy to roughhouse or whatever. I think it's tamed much earlier on than what we've already discussed today. At least I'm seeing that and doing my best to fight it, but it's certainly not encouraged.
I think it's funny that kind of dovetails into the whole social media thing, right? Because what you're presented these idyllic families, the kids that perform, they do a certain thing, they act a certain way, they behave a certain way, and then instead of recognizing, like you said, instead of recognizing the areas of growth that they need to experience to become contributing masculine members to society, we kind of push those down because we think those reflect poorly on the way that people perceive us, right? I need to present this family in a particular way. People aren't going to understand. It's like we've seen this all the time. This reminds me of this. How many times you see a parent in an airport or talk to a parent in an airport who's flying for the first time and they're absolutely terrified. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh my gosh, my son or daughter is going to, and I've got snack bags for everybody in my row because the reality of it is no one cares, especially, I mean, there will be those handful of people that have not experienced it, but any parent on that flight, which is probably a large percentage, they don't care. And I think similarly with the boys, luckily we're in an environment where I have a young boy, but he's surrounded in our neighborhood by boys. So there is a lot of wrestling and there's a lot of, we'll let him, when he was 6, ride his bike to his friend's house in the neighborhood. And a lot of parents wouldn't do that. They'd want to and we at times let him do it without a GPS device, God forbid. But that creates a sense of confidence, that fosters that sense of exploration. And, for me, I hope, to your point, that we continue. I think we'll do it at different societal levels. I think that the top 1%, if you will transition back first because they have the benefit of being able to focus on things like increasing, a child's sense of self-worth, and then society will follow. But
it maybe be fun to talk about adventure, like creating adventure for boys. I know that there is the helicopter parenting that can come into play, and just sitting there and being able to let, especially in boys, like my boys drive four-wheelers, we boat and tube, and like trying to expose them. We love to downhill ski. Like those are all kind of thrill things, right? Like those are things that kind of push the edge, and, going through the phase of taking hundreds of people tubing, right? And there's the phase, right? There's the freak out, I don't want to go outside the wake phase, and every kid starts there. And then they're like, oh, take me to the, then through a little peer pressure and their friends, take me to the right, or then swing me out to the left, and then it's always funny now because when you have a tube and you got some new and some old, there's always one person that's too cool for school. You're not going fast enough. They're just sitting there like, just being so, but that comes through that exposure. And so as we do but expose our kids to different things, how do you make sure you're doing enough of that? You're creating enough adventure in their lives.
We still do that, right? As adults, we talk about the hard thing we do every year, and I think that's so important to do. And we've talked about doing that actually with our kids.
I was going to say, we need to plan that.
Yeah, I think putting it on the edge, like the closer you can get to the edge. Now, we're not talking about, I think we all watched the video the other day of the guy who hiked up and skied down Everest.
Oh my gosh.
That might be a little too far to the edge.
I was nervous just watching it.
Just unbelievable. But that's where Todd and I were talking, I think the other day about, we're starting to plan next year's event. And I had talked to somebody about something for us. And one of the events we'd put out there had the potential to be kind of a 2-day hike, which would be cool from an experience standpoint, but I think we've actually all talked about it. We would probably leave that wanting just a little more of that, pushing up against what's possible. And I think doing that for kids doesn't exist much anymore. I would love to take the kids out to the Appalachian Trail for a weekend and let them see how far they can push themselves.
Let's go hike the Grand Canyon.
Whatever, right? But I see too many kids nowadays, and it's unfortunate. And I think some of my kids, maybe one or two of them, kind of showcase these behaviors. But there's just the level of anxiety is paralyzing, and it probably did start at that young age with the boys. Like, look, you can't do this. You can't roughhouse. Okay, don't do this to. And then all of a sudden, you're 15 years old, and everything that you felt primally is wrong. And so, anytime any of those feelings, rise up inside when you're in a competition, no, those are wrong. I don't want that energy. I don't want that. That scares me. Go away. And I think that's something that you need to learn to embrace and appreciate.
Yeah, I think the good news with this is it doesn't necessarily always have to be some outdoor masculine thing to making sure we're instilling values and we're channeling that energy in some fashion. I think there are other ways to do it. And so I think that gives us the flexibility to instill these things, the pursuit of excellence, the ability to fight through adversity, the ability to, have gratitude on a daily basis. I think some of those foundational values we have to find a way to instill. And whether that is doing an outdoor, aggressive type activity, or it's in other fashions, I think the biggest thing for me is instilling values that can sustain fulfillment long term.
When I say outdoor because I think in that environment, you're in a situation. We're in a society where you can't control the uncontrollable, and we're in a society where you can control more and more and more and more of what. Even
the
in
illusion of control.
Right. Well, and you think about the evolution of video games. When we were younger, you played on one difficulty and it was this hard and you figured it out. And if you died, you started from the beginning or you had to continue, whatever. Now you can micro adjust the difficulty throughout. You can, turn all of these different things on and off to give you a bigger advantage. But when you're in that outdoor environment,
I think that's the ideal place to do it, honestly. Yeah. I think that's ideal. And I think there are ways to, just for those that don't maybe, aren't able to do that or facilitate that in, sort of situation. I mean, even in sports, like you're saying, like the pursuit of excellence, challenging them to pursue excellence in the sport that they're doing gives, especially for males, that ability to figure out how to achieve and to know what it takes to achieve so they can achieve in all areas of their life as they get older, which again is that momentum that I think many men have lost based on some of the societal influences.
You have two daughters. I have two daughters. You got all the boys, but do you think about the type of men or man you want your daughter to marry, and then you work backwards of like, what would it look like to create that? What are the characteristics and traits that they're looking for, that they're going to, desire as women? Because I feel like what a woman is looking for, it just isn't as common in men today. And I still think it goes back to what we're chasing, what we value, the experiences we have, and sometimes in a lot of cases lack of development because those things that we used to do, I feel like we're getting old every time we used to do. We're in our 40s and it's like 25 years ago. They're not having to live and have those experiences in this world as much. They're doing it in a virtual reality world. They're doing it on a screen. They're maybe not, or the bar has been raised so high because women are so intellectually, further along and success, and they're always looking for a mate that's just a little bit above them, right? Would you agree with that statement or no?
Yeah, I think in certain circumstances, again, depending on the generation and when you grew up and what you're, I think it's funny. I think it's kind of a bell curve. Honestly, once you get past a certain age, you're just looking for whatever you can find. I've seen that because we all have single friends in our 40s that are dating and see some of that scenario. So I think there's a point in time in your life, again, depending on the generation you're in, that let's say if you're probably in your mid 20s now, you've been exposed to. Here's the thing, and I was going to mention this earlier, is the majority of exposure that people have to today's male via social media is through people that are pretty narcissistic, right? They're the guys that it's like the dynamic we've talked about when it comes to the squeaky wheel getting the oil, right? The loudest few people on X or the loudest few people on Facebook are the ones that get all the attention. And if you look at social media and you look at the bro space, it's make $10,000 a week, and it's be super jacked, and it's all of these things. And so then, women are exposed to, well, if my man's not making $10,000 a week, he's not the guy. He's not, he's not the top of the food chain or 20 grand a week or whatever that number is. He doesn't have, a Lamborghini or a McLaren or whatever. He's not the one. And so, they want to be at the top of this idyllic trash heap. And so, yeah, that's what they're pursuing. And then they continue to, I think there may be an element of it, like you spoke to, where they want to have somebody just a little bit better. But I think it's also this grand exposure to what the top of the top is, because you have 10 people out there saying that this is the top, right? Your Andrew Tates of the world, your yada, yada, yada. The one thing that, I'll say, actually, you know what? I lost my train of thought.
I think we've lost our way a little bit as a species. And I think there's a lot of good that comes with our willingness and ability. And I think this is happening all over, not in just the United States, our willingness and ability to challenge the status quo and to not just do things because that's the way they've always been done. I think there's some positive to that. I will also say that when it comes to foundational and fundamental aspects of how we've evolved and how things, I think we've gotten away from that. I think we've gotten a little bit of an ego as a society that we know better on fronts that I think we've overstepped our bounds. I think we've gotten out over our skis. One of the most controversial verses in the Bible nowadays is Ephesians 5:22 through 24. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also their wives should submit in everything to their husbands. And then this has been kind of pulled out as like this misogynistic, verse that women are less than men. But if you go and you catch the second half of that, it turns around and says, men, love your wives, and goes on. And if you actually dig into that, and you understand like the depth of the love that's trying to articulate, there are just the lack of the controversy in my mind is way overblown. But we live in a society that's like, no. There's this obsession with equality, and the reality is, it was absolutely designed in an equal fashion. But I think what we value as a society has changed, and so we've started to apply our own interpretations to these things that have worked foundationally for so long. And I just think we've lost our way a little bit. I think there's some foundational design for the family, the male, the female, that no one was more important than another. I mean, even in the Catholic Church, that gets a lot of heat for not having women that are priests, not having women officially in the magisterium. If you actually look like the influence of women from Mary to women throughout, like saints, doctors of the church, throughout, like their value and their worth, it's been incredible, the influence and the way they've contributed, even to, and I just think we've lost the appreciation for the original design, and I hope we can,
One thing that I think has made it extraordinarily more difficult is, I mean, gosh, we've come back to this about 100 times in this episode, but is, when you're married, it's as one. And you think about the amount of media we consume today. At times, Tara and I have sat there and kind of pondered, like, what today do we have in common versus what we had 20 years ago? And think about, like, we've talked about having conversations with your wife before bed or having conversations with your wife in the morning, but like the way we're operating today, I think generally speaking, most societies is your opinions are consistently, you're not discussing it with your spouse like you were forced to just because of lack of other people around. Now your opinions are reinforced by everybody else all the time. And so, as it relates to the way you're perceiving the world together, that can very quickly part ways. And I think that's something because of again, the amount of media. I mean, we've talked about echo chambers and how easy it is to fall into those, and it would be so much more beneficial. And I think that's something I need to work on personally with my wife, is starting to, engage a little bit more and talk through things a little bit more instead of letting, other types of media reinforce our beliefs, because I've found that it just makes doing life together more difficult when you're not having those conversations and developing a view of whatever scenario it is as one. And then secondly, I did gain my train of thought. I wanted to go back to what you said about looking for what you look for in a man that you'd want your daughter to marry. And I think for me, it really boils down to finding somebody who's fulfillment is through providing for her, period, the end. There's really not a whole else, because at the end of the day, if nothing's promised, right? And if tomorrow there's some type of apocalypse and his whole goal is ensuring that she can continue on as a human, even if it's this Fallout 3 type environment where, we're scrounging, that to me stands the test of time, is somebody that is there. That doesn't mean all of the traditional, it doesn't necessarily mean he has to open doors for her. It doesn't necessarily mean he has to do those type of gentlemanly things. But if at the end of the day, the purpose is I get my fulfillment through providing, and I will find where those shortcomings are so that I can fill those holes and provide, that's the goal. Yeah.
As we look forward, you mentioned Fallout 3 and who knows what's to come in the next 50 or 100 years. But if we fast forward 3 decades, it's 2050 something. And we're in a world where there's even less to be done and there's even less opportunities for progress and achievement in a real tangible world because so much of it's either being done by robots or AI. Like, what does that look like, and how does masculinity and femininity, like, how does that survive in that world?
Do you think this is going to be wild, but do you think you will start to see more people try to live, I don't want to call it an ancient life, but like, let's take the Amish, right?
Primitive.
The Amish right now probably think the same thing about what's going on, that what we're doing. They're like, nope, we're going to stay on the farm. We're keeping technology out. We're going to keep my guess is they probably have a pretty, I don't know anything about the Amish, but marriage, family, service, those things, they do those probably very well and probably do them much better than we do currently. So as you guys talk, it's like, well, maybe you'll start to see families have family homesteads. You'll start to see different groups of people pop up that are like, no, I'm going to go out in the country and I'm going to try to keep things. I'm going to try to instill different. I don't know if that solves the problem. I don't know if it is going to give fulfillment, but I just wonder what you guys.
I think you could see that from, like, as TJ mentioned, there's a group of people that may have the resources to be reflecting on that and to do that. I think there is a chance societally that we get very close to burning ourselves to the ground just as a species. And we're a very resilient bunch, so I don't doubt that we will figure it out ultimately, but I think it's going to be a really painful process. I think we just can't help ourselves. The dopamine, I mean, you see us, we just go after it like animals, and I just don't see our ability to collectively as a society, especially in a society where there's incentives to capitalize on those deficiencies as a human, right? I mean, corporations are making billions and trillions of dollars based on those instincts, and I think they're going to continue to push them. I think we're going to push ourselves right over the edge, and we'll see. We'll see what that looks like, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I don't disagree. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, we talked in a prior AI episode about the creativity that I think we will apply as a society when it comes to like the professional side of things. And I think, maybe one of the paths forward as it relates to creativity for purpose will be leveraging our strengths as men and women, right? And trying to get a little bit more primal and recognize, okay, this is what we've evolved for. Maybe it makes sense to pursue these paths. Maybe these things, maybe we should start embracing what makes us different. And you hear that a lot, right? But embracing what makes us different and drive that all the way down and see where that takes us versus what we've done over the last 20 years, trying to see how far we can improve our weaknesses, if you will. Because there are definitive differences. And
do you feel arguably that men and women are happier now than they were? I mean, it's going to be hard to tell because, again,
falsely,
when you think about the way that the house and the role and what society is saying is important, standing here today, do you believe women and men are, as a society, we're happier the way things have evolved, or we were better off the way they were?
I think there's a happy medium. I think the pendulum will always swing too far in one way and come back. I don't think that, and I don't know. I think that, again, if we go back to fulfillment, I think people probably felt more fulfilled when it was a family. You know, you go back to our great-great-grandfather who was digging ditches in Fairmount, Indiana, you know, and half the kids, you know, one of the kids ran away because it was such hard work and they were doing it at 4 and 5, 6 years old. I'm sure you felt more fulfilled. Like, I have a purpose. I'm getting up. I'm doing these things. I'm contributing to, you know, the income of the family. I'm contributing to the growth in preparation of our food through tending the farm or whatever. So I think you felt more fulfilled. I don't think that equates to what we believe is traditional happiness, or what has been defined as happiness, which is being able to relax on the couch in air conditioning and watch something that triggers dopamine. But I don't think necessarily that, I don't want to sit here and sound like that's all bad when you find something that, you know, I get happiness through, what do they call it? Type A, where, you know, like Dan and I ran 14 miles around Indianapolis on new trails I'd never run before. That was fun. It's not fun in a traditional sense, but for me, there was a dopamine hit when I finished, and that was really cool. So, you know, I think that there is an element of happiness that needs to be in play here. So to kind of answer your question, I would say that there was probably a point in time where we hit that. Maybe it was the 80s, maybe it was the 70s. And then I think now we've kind of gone too far down the path of, okay, the majority of people, that's all it is the sitting on the couch in air conditioning, watching entertainment that is specifically curated for the things that reinforce our beliefs and that make us happy. I think there's a middle ground there. So I would say there was probably, again, a point in time over the last 50 years where there was this peak combination of both of those things. But I do not think today that there's any more than there was.
Yeah, I think you nailed that. I feel like fulfillment for sure, and it all comes back to the definition of happiness. How are we defining this? And I think, sure, there are infinitely more conveniences and comforts in today's world, and I think depending on how you define happiness, you could say people are happier. And I think there was a point in time where being alive was miserable. I mean, if you think like relative to the conveniences and things that we have today, and you see a lot of it, like people had no problem dying for and going through even torture. There was much more of an openness to that, which seems barbaric, but I think that spoke to the difficulty of the time. So I would say life is easier, far easier than what it was. I think, again, depending on how you define happiness, certainly there's more hits of dopamine, there's more comforts and feelings, but I think they're fleeting feelings. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Chemically happier.
Yes. Good way to say it.
Well, that was a lot.
Yeah. Good one.
Obviously, there's a lot of complexities in this. We're not experts, just giving our opinion on our own personal situations, but it does seem like there is an opportunity, and even moving forward into the future, that we're going to have some challenges with purpose and fulfillment. So as fathers and husbands, we have our work cut out for us, but not all hope is lost. We will see you guys next time. Thanks.